Hello, everyone. I am Shamek Bosak, the Assistant Director for Instructional Innovation with the CATL. Welcome to AI Horizons, the Summer 2026 Conversation Series. Today, we are conversing with Michael Curtin, Adjunct Faculty of Game Studies and Design in the Department of Informatics. He also serves as the Innovation Coordinator for the Office of the CIO. He'll talk about a class that he has taught for a few semesters that needs a detailed plan for a video game, and he will tell us how he leverages AI not to generate content, but to use it as a framework for quickly externalizing, organizing, and iterating ideas, all before any real creative labor takes place. We have another event tomorrow at the same time, 2 p.m. Please check it out and join us if you can. If over the course of this talk you have any questions, please post your questions in the Zoom chat. We will relay the questions to Michael. Thank you for being here, and please enjoy Michael Curtin's presentation called AI-Enabled World Building as Iterative Mental Model.
Thank you for Shamek. I think you said that better than I would. Yeah, here, can we see the screen? Is it presenting in the Zoom meeting?
No.
Buckle up.
Let's pause for 1 second.
There we go. Cool. All right. That's good. Okay. I said my name is Michael Curtin, AI-enabled world building as iterative mental model. That'll make more sense in just a second here. I've worked in video games for quite a while, and then taken a very, very long break. I many years ago, back in 2003, graduated with a painting degree from the University of Illinois. A couple blocks away from here was the Art and Design building, where I spend most of my time and evenings and weekends and whatnot. A ton of fun. While a tremendous amount of people were stressing out through college, I was like painting a lot of naked people. There was just a tremendous amount of that. Somebody's got to do it in our society, and I took that role on myself. It was very, very important. Eventually, though, I transitioned into video games. I worked locally at Volition, and the only other notable place that I ever worked that anybody may have heard about is a place called Six to Start. I worked for them not in the London office, but that's where they're based. And they make a zombie running game, which is popular to this day. So I had a lot of fun with that. Then I had a bunch of kids and decided the video games were a terrible move for my family. So disengaged from that and thought video games were far, far, far behind me. Could not help but keep getting involved in what I would call emerging technology type situations. So I found myself on the VR at Illinois committee, and that opened up lots of doors with informatics. That eventually had led to someone knocking on my door and asking if I wanted to teach a class, which is horrifying because I'd never taught a class in my entire life. In fact, I'm very, very new to the concept of public speaking. In the past, I would have been completely mortified for this type of situation. I would have been verbatim reading off of a screen, which you've ever watched anyone do that for any length of time. It's kind of excruciating. It's difficult to witness. But I got dropped into a situation where I really got to learn at my own pace and get good at something. So this is the course. This is this spring. Well, I guess this is this fall's flyer. We have a tremendous focus on the industry, the games industry itself. While the academic pursuit of game design and its societal impacts are all extremely important, including to lots and lots of for lots of groups and students here at the university. My main experience has everything to do with the actual games industry, producing games that are then published that are meant to be commercial. And so my focus from the outset was trying to put students in a position where they could learn more about that industry, because most people are consumers of media as opposed to having a tremendous amount of information about how that media is developed, why it's developed, even where it's developed. But I really, really liked that. So the course itself kind of follows what you would have in a studio, where there's a great emphasis on lanyards, for instance. Every studio I've ever worked at, a lanyard is kind of a badge of honor. It's physically how you get into whatever space you're working in. So it's kind of a big deal. And there's 5 here, but there's 6 semesters I've taught this course, and each one has its own unique narrative and story that I brought to the table. And I'll kind of jump into that in a sec. The biggest thing, though, is I want students to be working together. And that was kind of a challenge at the outset, because if you have a typical art class at the University of Illinois, everyone shows up and does their own thing. They have their own ideas. They are pushing their own agendas. They are trying to carve out a place for themselves in the art world. But this is very much a scenario where with video games, it's wildly collaborative. You can have auteurs who make a video game all by themselves. The best recent example is the video game Stardew Valley. That talented individual who developed that got canned. and then thought I need to develop a portfolio. So I'm going to start working on this project. And that he ran away with it. And it was something where he did everything, the music, the graphics, the code, absolutely everything. That's extraordinarily rare for that to happen because most people aren't like multi-instrumental when it comes to something required for a video game, but also it's something where usually those things don't meet success because if you have a very, very narrow viewpoint that's expressed that thoroughly, usually it's terrible. Usually it's really bad. It's really often better when you get a bunch of people together, collaborating, working, talking, arguing, things like that. But it can't happen. But most video games, almost all, require that a lot of different people with a lot of diverse skills get together and talk and argue and try to put as much energy as they can into making the product, the video game, successful. So that's generally what you see. And that's really what I wanted to bring up in my course. So the core challenge for having a scenario where everybody shows up and they're not coming up with the video game and they're not drawing the things that they already like to draw is that we need something for everyone to work together on. The challenge with that is, what do they work on? Do we have a bake sale at the beginning where everyone gets to decide what game we're making, and then over the course of a week we work through them and we vote? Like, that's not realistic. That's not what happens at all, because in the games industry, most often you have a scenario where someone who's in charge of the studio or maybe even the marketing team says, we see a giant vacuum and I think we can make money if we make a game in this area. Or, hey, we bought this IP. We spent a bunch of money because we don't like risk. We know that there are fans out there. We just have to make something that's worthy of those fans. And that's what we're going to do. And we've hired people to do that. Meaning that most people, when they get hired at a studio, particularly when they're young, like I was when I first started at Volition, 25-year-olds do not get tapped on the shoulder and asked to come up with a game concept. We really need you. There's all these people that have been in the industry for 40 years and they have no ideas, but we need the fresh graduate out of college. So this was something where I really needed to put them in a position where they were being immersed, but they also weren't fighting the blank page, because so many people struggle with starting at nothing and then coming out of that and making something. And it's a very, very destructive process for many people. It's frustrating. So it was a gift, after talking to a lot of concept artists, people that I knew, to sit there and say, look, we got to come up with something they can rally around, a center of gravity for them to work from. And this is an example of the type of thing I came up. So this was my first semester I taught. This is what I handed the students. The first class was maybe a 30-minute pitch session. It's called an internal pitch, where you're telling the internal developers of a studio, this is what we're doing. This is what you're spending the next 2 to 7 years of your life on. This is what you're going to be missing maybe some friends' birthday parties for. This is what you're going to be doing late at night on a Saturday when you should be socializing, things like that. This is the project. This is the gravity. And what this is a world. This is considered to be world building. This, in this case, is a narrative progression. It talks about a story. So we have a story to hang everything on. We have environmental, I call them briefs now, because of the prompt term now being confused with AI prompts, but you can use the terms kind of interchangeably. But chunks of text that explain what's actually happening in terms of, this is what character needs to be drawn. This is the environment that needs to be drawn. And presenting it like this kind of shows how everything is moving together, a lot of moving parts. This is also showing things like how everything physically relates to one another. This was a very isolated location, and you could very clearly see these are the different levels. They relate to each other in different ways. You're going to be moving from point A to Z, and it needs to kind of make sense. But this is daunting. This is hard to do, to come up with an entire world. Now, in the past, when I would have done world building, I would have done a tremendous amount of list making. I would have done what's called mind mapping, where you draw a circle and you write a word inside of it. And that's maybe the only scrap of the idea that you have. And then you have a bunch of lines connecting off. And I would also be doing, obviously, things like lots and lots and lots of drawing. So it's something, lots of sketching, lots of thinking, list making, writing, and all of those things take a tremendous amount of time. They take a whole lot of time for a singular character, let alone an entire world, let alone me sitting down in front of students and saying, we've got 15 character prompts for this massive project for a classroom of students. We've got 11 environmental prompts, and each one of those is interrelated. There's world logic involved. They all make sense together. It's not just surface garbage. It's not just aesthetics for the sake of having a list of things to draw. It all makes sense. And it needs to feel like that for a lot of compelling reasons, particularly to get the students really engaged. So the question for me was how to do this in a way that not only were they excited, were they engaging with one another, but totally personal reasons and selfish reasons to say, I need to be excited because I am a terrible actor. And if I am wildly bored at something I am doing, it is crystal clear. And 16 weeks is a very, very long time to shuffle through a series of engagements with students where they have to do what you say because you're the one who controls their grade. And their grade is, generally speaking, what they really, really care about. If they do happen to learn something and have a great time, that's almost like an afterthought, but sometimes it does happen. But it was very much something where I needed to be excited because I knew, particularly with a collaborative project, if I was excited about something, that excitement, that enthusiasm was going to come through in my teaching, and it was going to get better engagement from the students. Better engagement from the students means they are going to produce better art, and my class is very much set up for upperclassmen to be put in a position where they can create portfolio pieces. So if you did happen to want to work in the video games industry as a 2D artist and you took my class and you actually followed along and you got excited and you challenged me, you challenged the material, you spoke up on behalf of your designs, there's an extraordinarily good chance that you would be making art that falls outside of what is considered to be typical student work. Typical student work falls into a trap because actual artists in industry have to do what other people tell them to do. And so they are stretching all the time and they are fighting deadlines and they're putting themselves in a position where they are doing new things. And kind of counterintuitively, it's something where if you just draw what you love all the time, your work becomes very surface level. It's very, very stale. But if you are being challenged, you will find opportunities to express things in a way that is much more compelling and interesting. And because video games are not singular, it's not like reading a book. It's something where you want to get in front of as many people as possible. You want people to tell each other about it, play games with one another. It's something where the more engagement you have around these designs, the better they're going to be. And that really very much comes through in professional work. With student work, it looks disjointed. Things are not connected. And that is most often what we see, where there's one drawing that the person's done, it's over here, another drawing in their portfolio, which has nothing to do with the other drawings. Everything is like a loose pile of bricks. And what you want is a brick wall. You want something where one design supports another design. It's obvious that it had outside influence. It's obvious that people were giving you feedback. It's obvious maybe that you were indeed working from a brief. And that's really what I'm trying to give students. So if I can get excited about something, that's the best. That's the best case scenario because I know that my enthusiasm can carry these students through their 16 weeks of work. Because again, for those who haven't been in classes for a while, 16 weeks is an extremely long time, particularly when you're taking 5, 6 other classes. So starting with a blank page is extremely tough, particularly if I'm expected to create 2 new worlds a year. I teach every semester, and so twice a year I need to sit down and dream up something before the start of class that's going to get everybody on the same page. That's going to give everybody something to rally around. I want it to be multi-layered. I want it to be multifaceted. I want it to just work on many, many different levels because every single artist in my class is different. They come at it with different interests, different passions. They like different types of video games. And in fact, the video game industry from when I was a younger man, where we would have seen a platform like Valve, which is very popular in terms of publishing games, they maybe produced 900 games when I was in college, in a singular year. I think last year, 18,000 games were published on Valve. And the fragmentation of the industry in terms of the different genres and subgenres and sub-subgenres is such that you take a random 18 student group and put it inside my class, getting them to agree on anything is wildly difficult. So I have to sell the idea of a particular type of video game to them. And what I most often do is go for science fiction, because with science fiction, you can have monsters, you can have robots, you can have mechanical stuff. Whereas if you go with something like fantasy, you're probably going to have a very, very time-locked aesthetic. And that's kind of tough. So I go for whatever's going to give me the broadest capability to say there's lots and lots and lots of different things that people can draw, lots of opportunities to get excited about things. The blank page is tough, though. And so many, many years ago when this class started, ChatGPT had just come out, and I thought I'd give it a shot. And what I did was I basically sat down and said, ChatGPT, I need a narrative. It needs to be exciting. I provided some characteristics that were required. I said, don't forget emotions. You got to think about this. We need some characters. We need some locations. And lo and behold, it created something. And it created something that I was extremely impressed by initially. I was reading through it going, this is sounding good. Like, this is going to be easy. Like, I'm going to teach my class. I get to focus on the teaching part, which at the time I was very unfamiliar with. We'll use this story. I'm just going to run with it. The more I read it and the more I created, the more I realized that this is not the logic that I want. The logic is extraordinarily surface level. And this world that ChatGPT, particularly at the box, can create is going to be something that I would consider to be wildly generic. And it was a wonderful lesson for me because the more I saw that it could, with zero effort on my part, create something, the more I realized that I really, really cared about what I was going to put in front of the students, which I did not expect because I'm not traditionally a writer. I'm a 2D artist, I'm a 3D artist, but I don't sit down and write stories and novels and things like that. And realizing that what it was producing effortlessly was not good enough for my taste had a lot of scary implications. but I still knew that I was not going to be able to use the traditional world building methods that I had learned because I just didn't have time. I was not going to have the time to sit down for hours on end and make mind maps and sketch out every idea and then resketch the ideas. I realized that this was something where I was already maxed out with 3 young kids at home. I already had 2 jobs. This was something where I was just not going to be able to do it. But I knew that if I engaged with these tools, I was going to be able to produce something better. So I kept trying to take what they produced and move it towards something that was going to make a little bit more sense. Eventually, I threw that out entirely and said, I got an idea. I'm going to run with that. And we're going to see how far I can push that in this format. The thing that is really, really a trap for a lot of people is what's called the sunk cost fallacy, which is if you put any amount of time into anything at all, you can get stuck on it. You can sit there and say, this is, because I did a few sketches, this is the character as represented. And you keep tweaking something, even though you should have abandoned it and started from scratch. And the greatest gift of this tool, of AI, in my opinion, is that starting from scratch with a new idea has never been easier ever. Because you can have, for instance, a voice conversation, as we'll be talking about in a minute, with AI, and it doesn't produce a thing. All it's doing is changing an idea in your mind. And the easiest way that you have to get an idea evolved at all, and then figuratively crumple it up and throw it in a garbage can is just having an idea, not committing any time to it at all. The more time that you commit into a drawing or a document that you're writing or anything else, you are going deeper and deeper. You're getting more and more emotionally tied to what you're doing because your time is valuable. And when your time is valuable, it's something where the more time you spend on something, the harder and harder and harder it gets to completely disengage from it. And that's a trap. And that's something that I know that I've done in my past where I've dogpiled a ton of time into a project, be it for games or anything else. And even if it's not going well, even if I find that I am just not enjoying it anymore, I'll stick with it, which is to my own detriment. And that is something that AI enables you to just move on. So particularly if AI is going to be creating something generic anyway, and it's effortless on your part, because all you're doing is, for instance, talking to AI. You're being put in a position where you can really, really move against the concept that if I sink time into something, it has inherent value. Because it doesn't. The only value you wind up at all with anything you produce is kind of the end when you're sharing it with people. And that is really, really hard, particularly for young artists to understand that even though they spent 2 hours on a drawing, that was the worst idea. That was maybe you shouldn't have done that. Maybe you should learn how to do thumbnails first and maybe build up things over time and show it to other people and get them excited about it. But AI is something where you never even have to engage with people. So particularly if you're learning something, I love that aspect of it. It's something where you can really, really just dip into anything and dip right out of it again. So I knew right away that I did not love what it was creating. And I think a big reason that I dislike what AI creates in terms of final output, in terms of if it says, I've made you a story and here it is because anytime that you are experiencing some sort of connection to a piece of art prior to the advent of AI, you were communicating with a person. That could have been a person who lived 10,000 years ago and did a cave painting in France. If you look at their art, you are communicating them. You are picking up something that they have put down. And the human brain's relationship traditionally with art is that if someone spent time on anything, it has some sort of value. And I need to evaluate what that value is. I need to understand, even for the briefest moment, why they did that and come to a conclusion. Now, I've been in a museum where I've looked at a piece of art for a quarter of a second and said, this is garbage. I don't care what they had to say. But I evaluated it from a subjective standpoint, based on my perspective, where I'm at in my life, and I either chose to get frozen in place and stare at it in awe and wonder and just be impressed or disregard it entirely. But I still evaluated it. The problem with AI is that you are no longer talking to a human. You're not talking to another person who, like you, has endeavored to create something. You were talking to a routine. And that routine has amazing abilities to mimic what we do, but that's what it's doing effectively. And so when you find yourself in a position where a singular person is developing something with AI, and we'll kind of show that here in a minute, that's a weird kind of closed loop, meaning that if I create something in AI that has meaning to me, the expectation that that AI generated thing has meaning to any other people is ridiculous. It's something where it's a conversation where the human being has not created it, and the chances of someone else appreciating what it means to the singular person who made it is very, very minimal. And because of that, oftentimes people's experience of AI generated anything is that they tend to like it until they realize it's AI generated. And then there's a weird cooling off scenario, or the tipping of the scales where they like AI art for these reasons, but it's not the same as if a person created it. It's just different. If you have a scenario though where people think that you've created something yourself and AI created it, then that's even weirder, because you're like basically talking to an alien. You're not talking, you're not having that human to human conversation. You're suddenly talking to this other, this thing that has nothing to do with us. And let alone my students just hate AI, to be honest. My undergraduate students, my graduate students, they are very, very frustrated by the industries that create AI. They understand the opportunities. They're not ignorant of these things. But by and large, they've chosen not to embrace it because it is undermining things, other things that they do value, like music, like author. I mean, like just anything that they could have an emotional tie to in any sort of media. The people involved in those things are being forced into a scenario where they're having to change. And so I am very, very neutral on AI, meaning that I understand the value of it. I get a lot of value of it as I'm giving this talk here. I'm kind of showing the way that I do use it. But if I were to go to my students and say, we're going to work on a project that AI wrote, there would be a general bit of unrest. And understanding that very, very early on was very, very useful to me. The other thing is the fact that I love to write. I love the grind. I love how hard it is. It's not something where I would ever try to publish anything. But I enjoy the process, and giving that process to AI is not something I want to do. I love to draw. It's something that I've done as a career in the past. It's something that I do for fun. It's something that I enjoy teaching my children. And I don't want AI to make my art for me in a way that I would distribute and have any sort of claimed authorship over. It's very much something where I don't want AI to take the things that I love away from me. But I do know also that the second I sit down and start to write something or draw something, again, there's that sunk cost fallacy. There's that concern that I'm going to find myself in a position where I'm grabbing on too tight, too early, and kind of losing the whole point, which is I just need a world for my students twice a year, and I can't be precious about this. I'm not going to hang my career on this. It's just something where I need to help them. I need to give them something other than the blank page so they can focus on drawing. That's the real goal. So I get up out of my chair and I go for a run. And you can also do this when you're in a car. A lot of people get stuck in the car for big chunks of time of their day. I do it at the grocery store occasionally because grocery stores have notoriously horrible music. I don't want to hear Genesis ever again in my life. And so I put earphones in and I start talking to AI. And the other thing is that like you can talk 3 times faster than anyone can really type realistically. So it's something where the idea of sitting down and typing with a chatbot is an inefficient way, particularly if you're not intending for it to generate anything for you. And that's my position. So I go for a run, I run around the block, I talk to it with weird little nooks and crannies, little parts of my life, 20 minutes at a time, a half an hour at a time. It's more like walking sometimes, but mostly jogging, maybe, running occasionally. And it's a scenario where I very much can just go back and forth with the AI without ever intending for it to make anything that I would then copy and paste into, let's say, something I wrote or anything like that. And so I'd say, let's talk about an idea I have. I tell it I'm using voice mode. It gives me shorter answers. I tell it not to give me bullet points. It's meant to be very, very much conversational. ChatGPT in particular, they're all getting better, but ChatGPT for years now has had phenomenal voice mode. It's actually gotten worse, oddly enough, because it lets you interrupt it now. And if like a car drives by, mine will just stop and think that I've hiccuped or something. It's very, very confusing now. But it's something where I start with an absolute tangled mess of an idea and going back and forth and hearing an idea repeated back to me puts me in a position, it's called like a Socratic mirror, I believe. That's the term that's emerged in the years since I've started this. Puts me in a position where I can subjectively evaluate it. Meaning that if I said to someone in the room, I have this idea, now you repeat it back to me. And if you, in your own words, repeated it back to me, that would change it for me. It would externalize that idea in such a way that I could judge it. Whereas if it's just trapped in my head, that idea is a perfect crystal, the best idea ever. But the second I hear somebody else, in this case an AI, say that idea back to me, which is by and large what a lot of AI does, it just kind of repeats stuff back to you, I can go, no, that was a terrible idea. I'm moving on. I'm going to try a different idea. I'm going to twist that idea, or I'm going to abandon it altogether. And it's cost me virtually nothing. I haven't even written anything down. I don't even have to delete anything. I don't have to worry about wordsmithing. I'm put in a position where I know I like my ideas right away. And I'm the first player of any game world that I create. And the people who then draw that world are like the second through the 11th players of that world. And that's how video games are. When you're making a video game, you are playing a very rough, weird, broken version of the game until one day coherence emerges and suddenly it's a game that you would actually put in front of other people. And then when they give you feedback, you change a lot more about it. But the people who are making any sort of video game, even at this stage, even at this rudimentary level, have to kind of view themselves as the first player. And if I do suggest something for a game world and it immediately sounds terrible, I'm just not going to go down that route. It's effortless and it's very, very quick. And it's something where, again, we avoid that sunk cost fallacy of grabbing on too tight. So here's an example. I have a game project. That's what we did this spring. It's called That's the Job. And originally it was set in Colorado. It was inspired by like Half-Life 2 and like underground facilities out in the middle of nowhere. And I had this guy, and he's like a hotshot type, hotspot, type firefighter, and all these things happening. He gets tricked into going underground, and he has to deal with this weird facility, and it just exhausted me. It was something where it was original enough. There was a lot of coherence that was emerging. I liked a lot of things about it, but I found myself trying to talk myself into it. And that is not a good position to be in at all. And the amazing thing, one of the better moments I've had using AI, period, was a moment where I was running and I just said, to hell with it. This is now set in Japan in 1987. Same exact scenario. We still have an underground facility. We have someone who goes to this underground facility. They find what are essentially compelling things for my students to draw down there. There's monsters, there's characters, all these things. But because it was set in a place that I found interesting because of my other interests, particularly things like I like kaiju movies, I like Godzilla type movies. This was something where, for me, it became like this can be like a prequel to this is how the kaiju was made. It's because this 22-year-old woman went down and found this facility, and there was something down there, and that set dominoes in motion. And the entire thing, even though it kept the skeleton of the original idea, different location, different time area where cell phones weren't going to be a part of it. All the technology suddenly became very clunky, which was a lot more fun to design and draw with big switches and buttons, all these things that matter to 2D artists. It was all suddenly very, very exciting. And my enthusiasm for this new setting meant that I could also tie it to other interests that I had, which was the history of Japan after World War II, which was obviously the lowest of the low and then the highest of the high by the 1970s and 80s. Much of the technologies that we've popularized today had a place where they were started there. And so it just took all these things and stirred it up in such a way that I was very, very excited. And that enthusiasm was what enabled me to keep going. And again, to carry that story through the class. And in fact, I find myself in a position where I have choices, meaning that every semester I don't just have one story that I have to consider. This is the one I'm going to do for my class because it's all I have. Right now I'm juggling 3 really solid, mature stories that I have to figure out which one of these do I want to use this coming semester. If I let a story sit for 6 months and I look back on it, am I going to care about it anymore? And if I don't, nowadays I just cannibalize those stories and say, well, I liked this character and I liked this environment, so I'll wind up using them for the next story. And it doesn't matter because of the effortless nature with which I can dream up something by going back and forth with AI. So that's kind of how I deal with the text generative thing. We'll talk a little bit more about what I actually do with that kind of mental model that I develop just by talking back and forth over a long period of time. If you are into visually generative AI, I like Midjourney quite a bit. So as an example here, a community living high in a massive redwood tree, dramatic lighting, retro technology. And I hated these images. This is something where I knew I wanted giant trees. Sequoia National Forest was an inspiration for this. And as soon as I started looking at these images, they gave me nothing. I didn't care at all. But there was little bits and pieces, like the lower right-hand image. There was something about it I kind of appreciated. Maybe it was the rusty parts I didn't understand yet. So I kept trying, and I kept changing the prompt and adding new things. And then I'd find a new image that I thought was compelling. And again, watching other people's AI process of generating something with AI is excruciating because this shouldn't have any meaning for you. But for me, this was getting closer and closer to something that existed in my head, but that I couldn't see. It wasn't something that I could just sit down and draw because I didn't know it enough yet. But this was kind of allowing me to pinball around and figure out what I really liked. And we're getting closer and closer here where there's bits and pieces of technology that are getting incorporated into these. The trees are starting to clarify around this is the type of tree I want. The scale is wrong. I want the trees to be bigger, more massive. And all of these questions kind of evolved into what winds up looking like this. A lot of neon, a lot of rust. And the final Midjourney prompt was cyberpunk elevated walkway outside an old Blade Runner shack built high amongst the redwoods. And this was the image that stopped me cold. This was the image where I said, this is it. This has meaning to me. This is finally something where I look at this image and I understand it. And again, this is just a conversation between me and AI. This is not something I would ever put in front of my students. And presentations like this are the only place I've ever shown this at all. And the class brief that eventually got in front of them was, the important part is here, like someone turned a starship inside out and bolted its pieces high up in the canopy. Because what this image told me about my narrative, which was this colony of people had arrived on a planet and they were stuck. They by choice, marooned themselves and took their spaceship apart because it was basically all they had to survive. And they needed shelter at the end of the universe and they knew they weren't going to leave ever again. To me, that was much more meaningful than just telling the students, it looks like Blade Runner. Just draw cool Blade Runner stuff. No, I had a narrative. I had a psychological reason for people doing these things and making these decisions. And from a design perspective, to me, it was tremendously meaningful. And that became the eye through which I made all of my decisions around what I was telling students when I was looking at their work and evaluating their work like this. I could subjectively look at it and say, now remember, this is what's going on here with the people who built these things. This is the meaning behind it, which was tons more useful than just saying like, I don't know, make it look cool. Like you don't want to just tell them that. You can't just tell them it's got to look cool and people have to want to jump on it and like walk around on it, right? Like, no, you need to give them something where they can take a story, they can internalize it, and they can start to tell little bits and pieces of their own story from their own perspective. And you wind up with stuff like this, which is all generated without AI, by the way. The students really, really want me to remind you of that. So in an interface example here, I do lots and lots of things like go to ChatGPT, I'll talk for weeks about a narrative, and then I'll say, all right, we're going to play the game. So pretend that you are a game master. We're in this world suddenly. Start to tell me what you see. And it will go back and forth. It'll say, this is where you are. And it'll give you ideas of what the environment is feeling like. It'll tell you when it's raining. It'll tell you what your skin feels like. All these things that it can do that make it feel more real to me, because it has to exist in my head wholesale for me to be in charge of telling other people to make it, if that makes any sense. And in the class, I very much exist as an art director. And the art director is responsible for all the visuals of the entire game. And so my responsibility is to get the students to visualize something that already exists to some degree in my head. And the more it exists in my head, the better job I can do of being their teacher, of being their art director in this faux scenario. And then I can say something like, great, that's fantastic. Now generate a user interface that communicates all of those emotions, something like that. And then it'll make something. So this happened to be ChatGPT. To me, this was a really compelling image. I also like the fact that a lot of times, because I love the old University of Illinois Plato system from the 1970s, I'll kind of use that as a start. It's very chunky, it's very big, it's kind of weird looking. And for me, it's just something that gets me excited. And then it evolves into this. So I take it over to Midjourney. I like the fact that it was showing different faces. And we wind up with this. Again, this is something where this image meant a lot to me about the game because it really pushed that even with the user interface of the make-believe, visual systems within the game, people's emotions were front and center. You could see their faces when you were communicating with them, and that was something that I wanted in the game. So this class brief for the student was visually emphasize the relationship between the characters and enable the interface to communicate their emotions. That's not something that I ever would have thought of for a UI design early on, but having gone through this process where I was trying to find meaning in these images created by AI, it enabled me to be put in a position where I could tell them this is what I wanted. Now, they didn't see this image. Again, this is all behind the scenes. All they ever saw was the text brief. But I knew what it could be compared to what a generic UI would potentially do. I call this stuff wrong, Wayne, which is essentially the more you can effortlessly put the bad decisions in front of me, the easier I can cast them aside and find value. I can ricochet or push off against those bad ideas, those generic ideas, the bland things, to find things that I'm actually excited about. Because again, my excitement is very, very important in the course. If I walk in there tired and exhausted and bored, they are going to be tired and exhausted and bored just by watching me, let alone going through all the machinations of having to create this art. I don't know about other artists in the room in particular, but like when I make art, it is a piece of me is coming out, and it is more tiresome than many, many things, meaning that I can draw on something and I don't feel often energized at the end of the process. I feel like I've really put work into it, even though I'm just moving my hand around. It's hand-eye coordination, but I feel like I've run 2 miles or something. It's something where it's difficult and it takes work and effort and mental energy. And the more you can invest mental energy in people to get excited beforehand, the better work is going to be. So the result for the students in this case, the result at the end of this process, this mental model of making lots of things, but holding on to none of it for the actual course itself, meaning I'm not saving any of the text. I'm not keeping the images. I sit down and I write an 8-page document. Some would call it a narrative brief. They don't really exist in the actual video game industry, meaning that if someone creates something like a narrative brief, it's usually just for the writers themselves, because then they have to create a bunch of other stuff to hand to other people. It used to be where you had like a game Bible and you would write the whole story down and you would write every part of the game down on paper, but they don't really do that anymore because games change so much that they use wikis now and it's little piecemeal, it's bits and pieces. But I get the whole thing in my head. And the narrative itself with the characters, the environments implies everything in terms of gameplay, how these things are going to work together, what sort of props we need, everything else. And the weird thing is I don't give this to the students either. They don't even see this. All they wind up seeing is something like this. So this is a part of the game where this is the main character. Whoop. So we have narrative and gameplay implications. It tells you about what's going on in the story. And these are all stacked on top of each other in a big list. This defines our character. This is the brief name, something that we can reference when we're talking about it in the class. So in this case, it's Rin in the Mountains. Rin is the main character of this. That's the job game I was talking about. It gives some context around it, something to kind of remind them of, and it gives a brief text. Now, if you're in the industry, you don't get all of this. You generally get brief text, and that's what you run with. But this is something where I'm trying to kind of pad information around this so the students feel supported, and very importantly, so that they can push back. So it's something where if they don't like something, they can challenge the material in a constructive way. So here's the example that we were just talking about. Hiking clothes, long pants and a shirt with sturdy boots. This is a description of a character. Sometimes it's what their hair's like. Sometimes it's their emotional state. Sometimes it's just their clothing. This is mostly focused on clothing. And then the students take this and based on where they're at in the semester, they start out with a thumbnail drawing, which is a little sketch. We'll see these in a sec. Then they do a black and white version. Then they do a full color version. And this is week to week to week. Eventually, they are iterating. They're applying motion to it. They get it in front of the other students. We talk about it every single course or every single week where we start with a critique. Everyone is kind of pitching their work, which is pretty much in line with what we have in the industry. And then people give their thoughts. I give my thoughts. We talk about where these characters are going. And this is what it winds up looking like. So this is that character. They start with these black and white thumbnails down here. They do iterations. They figure out motion. They figure out, okay, mentally, if you were this character, if you were wearing this article of clothing, look down. Look at your hands. Look what your shoulders are doing. Look at how they interact. Think about if you're going to be moving a particular way, how that's going to be reflected in your clothing. Man, are you going to have wrinkle lines on this part of your clothing? We kind of think about all of it. And the students develop art. And it's something where they can, at the end of the course, kind of present characters and environments that are aligned with each other. It's everything. Here's some robot characters. So we have how they move, how they crouch. This is a little stapler robot, which I love. I think that was invented by this student. And we have students who just completely go nuts with it. This person submitted just a tremendous amount of work, completely went overboard relative to what they were required to do. And we also do environments and everything else. But none of this is created by them with AI. Meaning that I've had students in the past who have attempted to submit AI-generated work. It's incredibly obvious when they do it. And it's counterintuitive to what we're trying to do, because what you're supposed to do in my class is struggle. You're supposed to go through the process of trying these things out that almost exclusively falls outside of what students typically draw, because again, this is my story. This is me showing up and saying, all of you have to work on the same project together and draw stuff I like. And it's a mismatch sometimes. We have students who obviously like to draw a lot of women in skimpy clothing. And then when they try to draw those characters, but the character lives in a forest in the underbrush, that's a mismatch. It would not make any sense for a person to be wearing those sorts of clothes. And that's a challenge for them to have to kind of recalculate and say, I have to think about my drawing, and I don't get to just draw what I want to. It's incredibly challenging in terms of a class, but the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. It's really a scenario where the students find themselves in an awkward position, but because there's so many of them all together in the exact same position, they lean on one another and they support one another. And since we're all publishing our work, we use like a giant digital whiteboard. We use Figma. It's something where when a student publishes something on there for class, the other students may be completely silent during the critique, but you will have 6 people put heart emojis next to it or write little comments, or you'll find that students were working late at night and they could see someone else was posting their work and they'll jump on there and say, that's fantastic. And it's something where it's a lot more like an actual studio in terms of collaborative support than I ever would have imagined. It's been incredibly good for me to see it and to be put in a position where I was a student. I was a person in my 20s when I first formally started in the games industry, and to be put in students in a position where they get to try these things out in a safe place has been a really, really like a balm to my soul. It's been great. So that's it. Happy to answer any questions. I don't know if there's a tremendous amount of people online. Yeah, please let me know if you have questions. If not, please reach out. That was one breath, by the way.
Oh, it's a hand raise online.
Mhm.
Yeah, go ahead, Patricia.
Hi, thank you so much for that talk. I learned a lot about gaming and game design and the process, and it's very, very interesting. There's a lot of questions I have, but I think the one that I'd like to ask, if you know, first, and I won't ask all the questions, is, you just said near the end of your talk that sometimes students try to hand in work that's been generated by AI. And you say, it seems to me that you recognize that right away. I'm curious to find out, you've developed an eye for it, or maybe you just naturally do have an eye for it, because some of us who are like teaching language-based work, we sometimes think we know whether a student, used AI, but we feel like there's a lot of work getting past our gateway. Or so what do you look for when you want to see or just do a quick check about whether something that's been submitted has been generated by AI? What are the red flags for you?
It's apples and oranges between visually generated AI and text generated AI. AI is a lot better at generating text that mimics humans, to the degree that you can go to an AI and say, Ernest Hemingway, write me this email from Ernest Hemingway's perspective. And I've read all of Ernest Hemingway, and I can read those emails and my jaw just drops because I feel that I've been put in a position where, like, oh, that's exactly how he would draft an email. That's pretty insane. But with visually generative AI, it's completely different. It's oftentimes way too polished, way too good. So I've had students who I know are pretty poor artists turn in work, and I'm like, did you get that good over the weekend? Like that's astonishing. That's not yours. There's been other times where I've seen artists that I know are tremendously talented in my class, and they have submitted work that just happens to look like the aesthetic of AI that AI is kind of coalesced around. And that's very unfortunate because it is their work. I can tell it's their work based on the specificity with which the art is expressed. But they also happen to have a style that everyone, the rest of their life, is going to associate with the look of AI. The problem you find yourself in with text generative AI, and I'm now less speaking as a teacher, but more so as the innovation coordinator at the Office of the CIO, is that most students are not handing in a wholesale AI generated assignment. They are using it to generate an outline, or they're using it to create pieces, or they ask it a question and they like the wording of the answer so thoroughly that they'll use 3/4 of the text in part of your assignment. And so it's this blending where to sit there and say, I need work that is 100% human created, and that is the expectation, it's almost impossible to get that because the workflow that many students are going through these days, where they are cutting corners, probably using, on parts of the assignments that they don't like. They might really get excited about something, but know that there's other parts is complete judgery, or they like this assignment, they don't like another one. They generally will try to rush through the things they don't like, or things that they really think they're bad at. Or it's completely out the window if English is not your first language and you are self-conscious of how your writing is going to be perceived because you're getting better at it. So it's really difficult to sit there and say, I can pick this out as wholesale AI or not, because usually it's just going to be a mixture. And that's incredibly frustrating. I will say, do not trust any of the commercial tools that are telling you they can tell, because they cannot tell. And there's just been way too many false positives where people think they've caught cheaters and the students are in anguish because they can't prove that they didn't somehow, some way, at some point in the 2 weeks it took them to write the paper, dip into AI. I wish I had a better answer for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? If you had questions, would you mind putting my NetID and their email address in the chat? I always forget to leave that, whoever's in charge.
I sure can. And there is another question. Anya, yeah. Or no, wait, that's not, okay, I'm getting confused. Anya asks, do you ever do compare contrast assignments with AI versus human created art?
No, I think that, I guess in a roundabout way, because I am occasionally, like I showed in this setting, I might be generating something and saying, this is the general idea I have of the final product, and then I have a text brief, and then the student submits something. And you're going to find that it's just wildly different. AI is gobbled up what's on the internet to create its ability to mimic human art. And by and large, it is using professional work, meaning that it's not finding a bunch of student work and learning how to generate images based on that. It's going to the world's greatest artists and places like ArtStation, if you're not familiar with that. If you look all over there, you're going to find Hollywood level artists. And these are people whose work is very popular. It gets passed around a lot. And the more work gets posted, and the more it gets passed around, the more likely it will have had an influence on AI's development of its visual capabilities and aesthetics. And so it's just oftentimes way, way more sophisticated and talented than, for instance, what I could do, let alone what any of my students could do who are 19.
And it looks like Natalie, I'm because I saw you on video now. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was curious if this course was also available for non-credit. I have my bachelor's degree, but I was just interested in learning a little bit more about development and game design.
Heck yeah, come on down. No, we have every semester we have one or two staff members who take the course. We have a lot of graduate students. We've had a lot of students take the course multiple times, even with no credit. And the reason is it's unique. It really appeals to some people. It does not appeal to other people. But it's rare for an art course at the university to put you in a position where you can generate art without having to just dream up everything on your own. And so even students who have left the course, students who have graduated will follow up and ask, like, can I have the text briefs from this new semester? Can I have that list of things to draw? Because it saves them a tremendous amount of time. Most people do not care if they're the ones who from scratch came up with every single article of clothing on a character or a special bolt configuration on a robot. I mean, like, they're just like, give me something to run with, and giving them kind of handrails, and then in the class giving a lot of critique and encouragement and feedback has made people feel things are possible that they did not necessarily feel were possible before. Most people don't get that feeling until they actually land a job, and that's unfortunate because the people who actually get a job in the games industry are usually wildly talented, even if they haven't had an opportunity to sit down and work on a big cohesive project like the class offers.
Super.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Let me know.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll email you.
Thanks.
Hey, Patricia.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of ask you about something you mentioned about these really talented students who are, really good at drawing and they're artists, right? And in every sense of the term. And then they end up where they might get great jobs, but it's in the corporate environment. And as you even described, it seems like now they're making art, but their art is framed and it's restricted and it's supervised and it's overseen, and they're in perhaps teams and there's a hierarchy. So if you come in out of art school, you're not going to be given perhaps, like, you're not going to be team leader, maybe your ideas are not going to be implemented, all those things. So artists, we think of artists as, and I don't think this is far from the truth, as being, highly creative people with sort of a sense of 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 what they want to do. And so how does this work when you have these very artistic people in this corporate environment that sometimes is driven by market values?
This is the difference between art and design. I came up in a painting tradition. Something that I was happy to run with, but also I feel struggled with when I was an undergrad student, was the expectation that I was meant to create art, and at least in the design or in the kind of fine arts culture of the University of Illinois at the time, which is 25 years ago, my art was meant to change culture in a positive way. And if I was not working on things that were meant to execute positive culture change, then I was wasting my talents. And I came from a comic book drawing tradition where I really wanted to tell stories. And I was very much at odds with the department. And that the department has changed since then quite a bit, meaning art and design now has an illustration program. They understand that the merging of the ability to render beautifully while also wanting to tell stories or wanting to even sell things, that's okay with them now in a way that it was not years ago. So design is very much about executing a vision for a purpose beyond the art itself, whereas fine art is you're making art for that singular piece of art's sake, and that art is meant to speak on your behalf. But yeah, with my students, I have to sit down the first class and say, like, painting students might struggle with this concept that what we are doing here is creating something that doesn't even wind up in a video game, for instance. We are creating a design language that will allow 3D artists most often to be inspired by our work and to run with those aesthetics and create software. And that software will be experienced as a combination of narrative and play and action and all of these different things. But it's software. That's what video games are. And that's a very jarring scenario for many people because they're like, that's not how I think about video games. It's this, this thing I play, but I'm like immersed, like it's in my head. And it's like, it's a piece of software. And then you have to treat it as such. And so it's very, very jarring, but it's fundamentally, to answer your question, it's the difference between what is art and what is design.
Okay.
Any other questions? I would say from the room, but like I've made eye contact with all of you 3-4 times now, so I think you guys are good.
I got some questions.
All right, what you got, sir?
At the pace of change of sort of the industry of video games, you see a lot of sort of stratification between genres, and there's now indie games, triple indie games, high budget corporate AAA games, and then like asset flip games. And I guess from a audience kind of viewpoint, like, is there anything? How do you like connect to your students when maybe their experience of being a game audience member, gamer, whatever, looks much different from yours?
It really, really took me by surprise. I don't try to I don't try to be like, hey kids, I'm cool and we're gonna like, no, I'm just right up front. I'm like, I'm 45. This is what the video game industry was like that I fell in love with. Here's how it's different today. We have a tremendous amount of students who don't even play 3D games, who've their entire life played what I would have remembered as like web browser style games that are like an evolution of the old 2D side-scrolling Mario games, but just a lot more sophisticated. And so it's very, very jarring to say finding common ground is lots harder than I thought it was going to be because of the diversification of subgenres. There's it's kind of like if you listen to heavy metal music in the late 70s compared to now, you're like, how many genres of heavy metal music are there? And they're like, oh, it's like 58. Like there's everything you can imagine. It's just fragmented. And that's games. And it's because games have never been easier to find or play or support, be it on digital platforms where you actually download and pay for them, or places where you watch other people play games, or places where you just independently watch videos. Every interaction you have with the internet is making someone money somewhere. And that interaction has allowed every fancy that you could have about a style of game to be supported in some way, shape, or form, which is very, very weird. The good news is I focus less on the style of game in my course, meaning that we're not delving too deep into like, here's the exact genre and here's where the camera is going to be. We talk about that a little bit if the designs require it. For instance, if there's a game that I imagine is going to be 3D and it's going to be third person, so the camera is going to be behind the main character and you're following them around and they're doing things, then I have to be like, you have to draw the back of the character. And they're like, no, I never do that. I'm like, what you do? Because you're going to see it more than you see the front of the character. So that comes into consideration, but what we usually get really excited about is character motivation, what they're physically going to be doing, how their physical actions are going to manifest in the design of their clothes. Again, like the back of the knee better be wrinkly if the character's been wearing the same clothes for 4 days in the story. You know, it's something where those things have to kind of ricochet against each other, that reality. So that's the kind of thing we deal with, and I really hesitate to try to get them on my side that any decision that I make around the design of the game is the right one. It's very much like, I'm your art director, you're my gigantic, 20-person concept art team, and we are going to get through this together. So, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
We have time for one more, if you'd like.
Well, hearing nothing, I'd like to say thank you all for listening. It's incredibly generous to dip into something like this, which most people don't have to delve into this world. I'm very, very happy in getting to teach my course and even happier to get to talk about it to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Michael. Just a brief plug for tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. Agentic AI at UIUC is the topic. Please tune in at the same link you joined today to hear Michael's talk. Thank you, folks.